Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining me, Amanda Patterson, for Don't Reinvent the Wheel, Implemented Structured Authoring, where today we're going to look at where my implementation process is, kind of a little bit of where we came from and where we're going to be going next. So how it started. It started obviously pretty simple. And I built this sketch in my head based on the things that you folks are doing now. DITAWorld presentations, Adobe white papers, textbooks on the subject, blogs on the subject. And, you know, in all of those instances, everything was presented very clean. And I really believe that what was laid out was exactly what I needed to do to successfully implement structured authoring and migrate all of my content from unstructured to a structured authoring instance. And we even have a term for these, ironically coming from me doing one of these presentations, is that it's a customer success story, and where customers of Adobe, such as myself, will come and talk to you about how great this process was, and I'll lay it out and it'll be beautiful and simple. I'm sorry, that's not going to be this presentation. We're going to look at where the challenges were and why the implementation was still successful despite those challenges. So how it's going. I went again from that simple little sketch into realizing I needed a much more robust solution. The project was bigger than I thought, even though I knew the implementation projects were slated to be 18, 24, 32 months long. I didn't necessarily understand what all went into it and how much work each step really was. And I think that's a huge first lesson, is in really setting expectations for yourself, your team, your stakeholders. What is this really going to take? And how complicated is this process? You can do some content migrations this way, but that's just moving from, what you currently have into maybe a new software to author in. But if you're really looking at actually implementing from unstructured to structured authoring, it is going to be this. It is going to be this much bigger and much more complex project, because it's not just what you're going to document and how you're going to document. It's really going to take changing people's perspectives on what you're authoring and how to actually author documents. It's going to take some real brain power to change minds and to change comprehension of what authoring actually means. So I'm going to walk through some of these challenges that we faced. I'm going to talk to you about some of the considerations that we took when making decisions. They may be the same for you, they may be slightly different, and they might be the same considerations, but your answers and your circumstances may be different. So I hope that you kind of take these a little bit with a grain of salt and really look at how can you apply some of the concepts that I'm talking about here for you. So this gets me to my wheel. What did I end up trying to build? And where am I coming from? So Hunter Douglas is a luxury window coverings manufacturer. In short, we're a consumer goods manufacturer of all custom products. Very few of our products that come off of our manufacturing floors are exactly the same. They will vary, either wildly by shape and style, but they also may just vary by dimension that we have to adjust for that. So it's a very complicated product or set of products, and a very complicated manufacturing environment. My team, I have 5 people that report to me. We are responsible for 2 brands, over 20 products, 10 or 15 operating systems. So the operating systems being how the window covering functions and moves, 6 design options. And so for us, our design options are, we have window coverings that open like this, we have window coverings that open like this, and we have window coverings that open like this. So all of those are obviously multiples, so we have a lot of customization that happens and a lot of robust documentation that goes along with it. in terms of our content, overall, we have 8 different types of content. And there are 2 of those types that have roughly, as I'll talk about a little later, we found out have about 90-some% content reusability, not just within each doc type or content type, but also across content types. So one of our problems is how do we author this without all the manual repetition of the same authoring tasks, and to make sure that our documentation is consistent and clear across all of the documents that we author. And then of the 2 content types that we chose to work with to start the implementation, we have about 300 documents, and that's about 5,000 pages of content. It may be a little more depending exactly how you kind of cut, slice, and calculate that. So where we are starting from is Adobe InDesign, and we have been in Adobe InDesign house for a very long time. So I have a lot of legacy content that was gifted to me when I took over this team about 3 years ago. And where we're going is we're going to push this content into structured authoring using Adobe Experience Manager, and AEM Guides will be our authoring instance. So let's take a step back and let's look at why structured authoring. So structured authoring allows you to do a lot of things and takes out a lot of the manual repetition of content authoring and maintenance. For example, it will improve your content consistency and quality because you will author once and use in many places. It will enhance your content reuse and modularity. So by really thinking about how are you going to break down your content and how it functions and how each piece of that content functions, and where can you break those apart so that you can use them more like Lego blocks to build documents instead of that same copy and paste, or have it worse, having to remember where did you write that, and should this say the exact same thing or be slightly different, or is it the same thing but with variation based on location or audience or something like that. So that maintenance component is really going to be much more easier to do when your content is structured. Again, increase in efficiencies, because this will, where you are used to be authoring in many places, you'll be authoring in one place and producing in many documents at the same time. If you are a company or a shop that is looking for translation, because you're going to remove the presentation layer of this, you're going to streamline your localization and your translation processes, because then your translators, or if your translator doesn't have a desktop publishing group, your team, it'll all be streamlined because you won't have to do all of the editing and layout based on different languages and different text lengths and all of that. And lastly, there's a scalability quality to this, that once you have this system in place, you can future-proof it so that if you add new products, or you subtract products, or you add audiences, or you subtract audiences, or whatever other changes may be coming in your organization, your content can grow and expand with that fairly easily. And again, the moral of the story here is no repetition, lose the manual labor part of authoring in order for fast, efficient, and effective content creation. The how all this happens, we're going to talk a little bit about throughout the presentation, but these are the key reasons of why you want to do this: content reuse, authoring and maintenance efficiencies, streamlined translation, modularity of content, and scalability and future-proofing of your content. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why this happens and how this happens. So this is one of the case studies that I used. I've taken some of the detail out of it just for confidentiality reasons, but this is the automated authoring case study that I presented to my stakeholders in order to get approval for implementation of structured authoring. And I the key about this is that it really explains what structured authoring is, because when you try to explain this to tech writers, even those of us in the field, is kind of a little bit of a mind warp. When you start trying to explain this to people outside of tech docs, it gets that much harder. So your current situation, you probably author in 5 or 6 different places, and you have to author that same paragraph. Or again, that same paragraph may need to be authored in 5 or 6 places based on another factor, a localization, an audience, or something. So something in that paragraph changes slightly. With structured authoring, instead of that manual copy and paste and do the layout work, you author it in that one location, and then it proliferates into all of your other documents based on where you link it. So it's author once, produce many. You stop authoring in 50 some odd documents, and we started looking at maintaining about 3 content chunks or 3 topics and 10 images and 1 keyword were all that we then had to maintain, not the 3 content chunks and 10 images and 1 keyword scattered in 50 documents. It much more controlled environment, one author in one place, proliferate in many. Again, looking at duplicated content, we have been asked to expand one of our documents to include a new audience, but that audience doesn't get everything in the original document that we had. So it was sort of like, we want that document, but only about half the content. Okay, that's a huge ask because you are literally duplicating your content. That means that you have a whole nother place that you have to author, you have to update, you have to correct, you have to maintain. It's twice the work, no matter how you cut it. But that duplication of authoring and maintenance goes away in structured authoring because you're grabbing pieces that you've already authored, you're grabbing those sort of Lego block-like content and duplicating that through links in all of your documents. In DITA, they're called maps. So again, you can just sort of grab the pieces that you want without rewriting them, without recreating them, and just build a new map and put those pieces that you need into that document. And creating a new document that's slightly different than the original will take minutes, at least for the first draft, minutes and not hours. So your ability to go from start to finish in creating a new document is much, much faster. Speed to market is key here. The faster we can create documents, the more content we can work with, the more products we can support, the more valuable we are to our companies. So how does all of this happen? How do we actually do this? What's the secret? And the secret behind all of this really great content reuse is the DITA Open Toolkit. And DITA stands for Darwin Information Typing Architecture. And DITA is an open source publishing toolset specifically designed for content. It's a collection of software components and scripts that enable the transformation of DITA-based XML source files into various output forms, such as HTML, PDF, and XML. Okay, so that's their official definition. DITA is the framework that will give you what structured authoring is. It gives you the words to break your content apart in a way that the computers can read and the scripts can read, to get all the reuse, to have the duplication, to have the author in one place, repeat in many. And it allows for you to stop authoring the documents and start thinking about how your content functions. So that way you don't have to go through and go like, oh, well, this is a heading 1, so it should be this color and this size, and I have to change this in every instance. It will, all of that formatting, when you get the output class, it surfaces based on that format. So Again, the idea is if it's a heading, it gets labeled a heading. If it's a body paragraph, it gets labeled a body paragraph. If it's an ordered list, it gets labeled as that. If it's an unordered list, it gets labeled as something else. And what this means is that in every instance of use of that functional title, your content will surface in the output in the exact same way. So you won't have bullets that are at 3 and a smidge, 3.25 inches in from the tab. It's all exactly the same. It's the same bullet. It's the same size bullet. It's the same spacing everywhere, because you're now thinking about your content in functional means, not just I need it to fit here in this place. I love it because it really eliminates the idea of having to worry about the formatting. I can focus strictly on what I'm writing and make sure that what I am writing is correct in form, fit, and function. I know it'll fit based on the form that I am writing it because I know the function that it plays in my documentation. So DITA provides you the language to make those classifications, to organize it based on words that are industry standards that everybody is using, that output software is aware of and can translate. To kind of get into this a little bit more is that DITA has, I thought it was a little bit more, about 170 some odd elements, and those 170 elements work together and individually to format your document, to structure your content. In addition, there are also attributes that are available that will allow you to, further delineate your content, that just because it's a task topic, if that's its function to do a procedure, that task may change based on audience. So you can add those attributes to have those instances where it's almost the same except for this one part. There are lots of attributes for audience, role, class, output class. You can have many answers for each of those attributes, and all of those attributes can get applied to many of the elements. And so if you're kind of doing the napkin math of like thinking about this, your brain is probably starting to run around, and you're starting to get a little anxious about how much of this stuff do I actually need to know, and how do I know how it all fits together? Because the next part is that the elements work in conjunction with each other, and sometimes you can have one element in one space and another element in another space, but not the opposite. So there's a lot of customization that you can do, and that's part of the scalability, because you can cut and slice your content down so minutely. That gives it the modularity to pick and choose and rebuild for reuse, and the modularity that you need to scale this as you increase in the products that you're supporting. It's also what makes this is also the difference between that little sketch of a Ferris wheel and a full-on rideable carnival Ferris wheel, because this is where the complication comes in. This is where the complexity comes in. This is where I started to get overwhelmed once I figured this out. And then I said, okay, how do I wrap my head around this? Like I'm in. I get that there's this framework called DITA and it's really complicated, but I know lots of people are using it and I just need to apply it to tech comms at Hunter Douglas. How do I do that? And that's when I started looking at, okay, no, really, what kind of Ferris wheel do I need to build? What does this look like here where I am? So I started looking at how much content do I have? What content lends itself best to this kind of a process? And that's looking at what has the highest reuse value for my lowest effort to input. And how do I figure that out? I started to really read my content, all of it, and as painful as that may be, but to really read it and internalize it to know my content, to know how each section of my documents function, to figure out where things are the same, where they should be the same, but they should be slightly different, why they are slightly different in those instances. What's the attribute that's driving that variation? And started to look at, okay, I know, how many documents does this apply to? How many pages? I even started to look into like how many characters this might be. There are lots of places online that you can just look up, what's the average character count per page and that sort of stuff to kind of get some of these numbers. No, I did not one by one count characters on pages of content. Ain't nobody got time for that. And as I started to see some of these similarities and got some of the, these doc counts, I started to kind of sort my documents. And a lot of us probably already have this sort. It's, it's how you organize your folder structures. It's maybe how you organize and surface your content. You might want to reach out to, if you have like a customer experience team or another team that actually publishes the content, to see how are they surfacing this and how do your customers actually interact and think about the products and think about your content, because this is where you really start to chunk the content and you look for the reasons why things are the way they are. You want to look at where your product families, we had a lot of overlap in how our operating systems work, even across products and product families, but if it's operating system A, they all function sort of more or less the same way. And that's not necessarily a common way for everybody to think about our products, but it was a great way for us to start looking at where does this content overlap and where can we reuse it, and should those be places that we put in attributes based on operating system. And sometimes that worked. And those were kind of one by one decisions about what felt right to us in terms of how complicated do you want to make the authoring environment. So one of the decisions we made there was, at some point I said, you know what, it's okay that these things, these topics or these tasks repeat, and we have individual topics for tasks that are slightly different, because adding another layer of metadata on top of that made it just too hard to find and figure out. And those are, I'll be honest, those were decisions that I really worked with my migration vendor with to really figure out where is there an acceptable amount of duplication just for ease of authoring. This was also a place where we wanted to walk, crawl, and run, in that in the first implementation of structured authoring, I said, you know what, I'm okay with not having everything down, every instance down to one with a bunch of attributes, that my team is used to thinking about our content in such a way that if we get it down to 5 from, say, 50 instances, I'm good with that. That's enough until we get comfortable with the system and with this style of authoring. And then you can go back and run with that. And, once your team gets comfortable authoring in that style and using the attributes and the metadata to find their content that needs to be edited, then you can go in and always get more reuse out of it. But I opted, because brand new implementation, new style, I opted to leave a little bit of the repetition in there, and keep my reuse numbers are a little lower, but not by much. And I'm still getting much more speed in authoring. The other part that you want to look at as you are trying to figure out what your Ferris wheel is going to look like are what tools do you have available. Again, Hunter Douglas has been an Adobe shop for quite some time, so all of my content is still and was in Adobe InDesign. So that means I need software that works with Adobe InDesign. I need conversion software, I need implementation software so that this all is kind of a one-to-one. There isn't a whole lot of, manual labor that needs to go in to clean up the content. We also, another decision that was made before I was hired on was that our CCMS is Adobe Experience Manager, and I absolutely love it. I think it's a robust program that allows me to do as much as I can and want within the Adobe family. And so then the decision of what is your authoring environment going to be? And again, for me, that was a no-brainer. Is Adobe came out with AEM guides, and that again integrates seamlessly into AEM and made the content migration from InDesign. We actually wound up going from Adobe PDF into AEM guides pretty clean, because it's all within the Adobe family, and that meant there was no other outside software implementation that I had to interface with, and custom plugins and all kinds of stuff like that. So you're going to want to look, to keep it simple, you're going to want to look for the authoring tools and the environments and the CCMS that really work well together. And Adobe does have a complete package. So the next thing that we kind of did was, again, looking at, I have all of this content, and I started to see where it overlapped, and I started to see where we had some gaps. But if DITA is about putting structure to this and labeling things, given a specific framework, I was like, well, I guess I got to figure out what I call it here today first, and then I can kind of figure out how it connects to DITA. Like, where is it the same? Where is it different? Where do I maybe need to like call this something slightly different? And that's where we went out and we built a taxonomy. There is a whole bunch of content that I could talk about in terms of a taxonomy, but I'm just going to really hit the high level on this, and say that there's all kinds of resources with the Society of Technical Communications, the Content Wrangler. There's a lot of work out there about taxonomy. So if you want to go deeper into what is a taxonomy and how do you build it, there are other resources for you. But in this case, building a taxonomy was really just about looking at how do we currently organize our content? And again, where are our product families? Where are our products? What are our operating systems? What are our design options? What do we call these things? So in more general terms of like, how do we categorize our content? Unless you are truly working at a startup and you are the first person they hired and there is just nothing, chances are you have some kind of a loose taxonomy to start from. You have a folder structure. You have, again, how your customer experience team surfaces the documentation to your clients. So there is something there. There's a wire frame there that you can start with. And then once you kind of have how those documents are organized, then you can look more narrower and look at within the document, how is that content organized and what is it called? Why is it there? How does it function with what comes before it and what comes after it? Because once you have that in your language, probably with a consultant, you'll be able to look at how do I then apply DITA to this framework, or how do I get this framework to fit into DITA? And that's what you need out of this taxonomy. A lot of times when you look at taxonomy stuff, you're going to get a lot about tagging, and that's great too if you can apply that to your InDesign files, and then export as XML or as DITA from InDesign. That's a possibility. For us, we had way too much unstructured kind of chaos going on in our InDesign files because we had all this customization in our products, that trying to use the tagging function within InDesign was just way, way too much work and too confusing, and having to do that on so many documents and so many pages of content was really just not worth our time, that there are more effective and efficient ways to do that. The second thing that I would recommend looking at is creating an information model. I will also say Dawn Stevens from Comtech is my guru on information models, and I'm going to give you a high level of what I have learned about that here, in that the information model is how you write and how you apply DITA to your content. So the taxonomy is how do you structure it, and the information model is how do you write it, how do you make DITA fit into it. And what this means is if you have a style guide, you're going to want to bring that in because that's part of the information model. If you have any kind of formatting guides, you want to bring that in. That's part of the information model. And even down into the really nitty-gritty things like, do you use an Oxford comma? Can you have a single bullet as a list? Can you have unordered lists? How do you, if it's a list in a sentence, do you have the colon at the front? All of these decisions are about how you author the documentation. And they need all of that in the information model because they're going to use that, and you're going to use that to create your style sheets so that when you have your taxonomy and your content structured on the application of DITA, what is a heading or what is a bulleted list is how you write it, is all in the style sheet to create the output so that you don't have to do the formatting. You don't have to remember all of these things. DITA will do it for you. You can focus on, is my content correct? Is this clearly written? Is this written for the correct function that it's supposed to be fulfilling here? Because you can't finagle the formatting the way you used to. We're getting out of the layout business and getting into the authoring business. At this point, you have now heard me say things like, with my consultant, with my vendor, with these people. I did a loose taxonomy, and I thought I knew what an information model was, and I did a loose information model. And those were both very useful sources for me to front load consultants with. But I highly, highly recommend that you hire a migration consultant, because these are people that do this for a living. And find one that can work with you, that's within your budget, because at some point in this, I just realized I was way, way, way over my head and deep in the weeds and had no idea what direction to go in. And my migration consultant really helped sort out everything that I had and where to go next. DITA is great in that it does have all of this customization. The downside is that it has all this customization, and depending on how you use each element or how each element can be used will kind of determine, what your output is. So there is sort of anybody can do DITA, not everybody can do DITA well. And that's where really hiring the professionals to make sure that you do it well for your instance is incredibly highly recommended. Things to consider with a consultant. What's your scope of work? What are their services? How much do they cost? What is their time frame? What is your time frame? And I also have to be honest, there's a likability factor in there too. Do you feel like you can work with them? Migration consultants can also help you find the right tool for the right job. So I originally went into this project process thinking my team knows their content the best. We have, again, a lot of unique content. We have a lot of customized content. We have very customized products. Getting up to speed on my team can be really hard because you don't have the product knowledge of why is it like this, sort of like that, why we don't do all of these things. And my migration consultant really looked at me, because I was like, okay, but like how do I, like really, like how do I get it from InDesign into DITA? Like, and I got to be honest, I tried doing it manually. Man, that was like 4 weeks of a lot of work on my team and didn't get very far. Not because they were slow at copying and pasting, but the application of DITA was all over the place. Some people called it a text. Some people called it a paragraph. Some people called it a definition term. Some people called it a key term. Some people did this as an ordered list. Some people did this as an unordered list. And I was like, oh my God, like, and then, even at the higher level, some people call it a concept topic. Other people called it a reference topic. Some people called it a task topic. And we just didn't have the knowledge to understand what are all the true differences between these things. And so I kind of brought this up with my migration consultant, who chuckled at me a little bit and said, well, you hire a conversion vendor. And I said, a what now? And they said, a conversion vendor. And you go out and they gave me recommendations of some folks to use that, because it's a repetitive task, right? You want all of this content into the same form. Computers are really, really good at repetitive rote tasks. And so I worked with a migration vendor who took my content. We tried it in InDesign. My InDesign was so unstructured. They were like, okay, we're just going to stop there. Let's just do it with the PDF. That was cleaner. And with the help of computers and yes, some human oversight to, verify and check all these things. But they ran a script on it. And again, having the right tool, non-manually automated, converted my content from InDesign into DITA topics. That was one of my bigger, I didn't see that forest through the trees moment. Of course, there's a company that will migrate your content from one form to another. So that was just absolutely invaluable information for me. We already talked a little bit about this. Again, cost is a big thing, your timing and the services they provide. So by hiring a good migration consultant, I also then found out that I needed a conversion consultant or conversion vendor. And between the two of them, they really helped me explain the differences in what their businesses were. And that allowed me to sell that up the chain of command to my stakeholders. And it's with their help that I actually got my content migrated. We're looking at wrapping up our project in the next month or so. And getting my team is already starting the training. Thank you to Adobe for your great training on guides and how to author in structured authoring. Thank you for joining me here at DITAWORLD 2023 for how to implement structured authoring. And I just want to leave you with one last thought of, you're not alone. There's lots of help out here. The biggest lesson is to really make sure you have the money in your budget to hire some consultants to actually do this work for you, because you really need the expert to know which tool is the best tool for you and how do you actually get your content from A to B. That was the biggest lesson I learned. And I have some great consultants that I've been working with and met a lot of really great people along the way. So a couple of companies to think about. Obviously, Adobe will support you through your entire migration. But I had migration consultants such as Precision Content out of Toronto and Comtech right here out of Denver. And my migration consultants that were really great, I looked at Data Conversion Laboratory and Stilo for my conversion consultants. So thank you to all the folks that helped me through this project. And thank you everybody for joining me here at DITAWORLD 2023. Enjoy the rest of your time here. Thank you.